this evening.
It was a little chilly yesterday when Paul left Londonderry, New Hampshire. So let's give him a warm southern welcome, Mr. Paul Pelland.
How chilly was it?
Actually, yesterday was fairly warm. It was 25.
You know, riding a motorcycle to me is, it's like breathing. I think I started riding motorcycles when I was 21. I had been on a few of my relatives' dirt bikes years before, but it was, my first motorcycle was actually somebody owed me some money, and instead of paying me 50 bucks, they traded me a beat-up old Honda CB 554, actually, that hadn't run in 15 or 20 years. I cleaned it all up, got it running, and jumped on it and went off down the street. I got the bug, and within a year or so, I bought another bike and another one. I've had a lot of rough times in my life. I've always seemed to pull through. Sometimes I don't always take the easiest path, and a lot of people tell me what I'm doing is crazy or never work, but learning to believe in myself and to trust myself has gotten me through some of the tough times. One of the things that I've realized in the past 5 years that I've been riding is I believe my health is actually improving. Finding something that I love to do and making it more important than my disease is actually part of my therapy. Because I'm happy, because I'm passionate, because I'm doing what I love, it's putting my disease at bay. It was about 5 or 6 years ago, I was at a patient event and I heard a doctor say, a cure for MS was 1,000,000 miles away. And it got me thinking, 1,000,000 miles? Well, it's far, but it's possible. And that's when I decided to document riding a motorcycle 1,000,000 miles for MS. My name is Paul Pelland. I go by Long Haul Paul. I travel the country as a patient advocate, speaking to groups that are affected by multiple sclerosis, hopefully trying to inspire them to find something that they love to do in life and to make it more important than their disease.
All right. That's all I have to do. Thank you very much. Epstein did not kill himself. I did notice that only 2 non-Harley Davidson riders were invited to this banquet. One of them had feathers. We just ate it. The real challenge will come in about a half an hour when we have to battle tryptophan. Well, thank you for inviting me here today to learn a little bit, so I can share a little bit about my diagnosis, my 1,000,000-mile journey, and for MS, and to tell my story of how entering the world's toughest motorcycle competition on the world's most unreliable motorcycle ever built became an incredible lesson for me about overcoming impossible challenges and what all of us can achieve if we just put our hearts and minds to it. I've been riding motorcycles for over 30 years. I ride motorcycles like most people drive cars, and some of you do as well. I commute, I travel, I go shopping with my bike. I've ridden in all the lower 48 states, Mexico, and Canada. Riding a motorcycle for me is as natural as breathing. In 2003, I was entering and placing well in long-distance rallies all across the country, and I was sort of at the pinnacle of my riding career. For the second time, I was chosen to ride in the world's toughest motorcycle competition, the Iron Butt Rally. And although I managed a top 10 finish, In the 11-day, 11,000-mile event, something happened during that rally that would forever change the course of my life. I don't remember arriving at the mid-rally checkpoint, but I must have looked like death because the rally staff ordered me to skip the mandatory riders meeting and go directly to my hotel room. They did manage to tell me, however, that I was actually in first place in the points. I had prearranged to share a room with a fellow New Hampshire rider. The next morning, something was very wrong with me that sleep didn't fix. I had no strength in my hands. They were tingling and numb. I could not hold a pen. Was it the heat? Was it fatigue? Whatever the reason, I was also confused and I was disorientated, and I was unable to plan a good route for the next leg of the event. Later that morning, I came across an accident, and although the bike was partially upside down, I thought I recognized it. So I stopped, and I went over to the rider who was being helped by EMTs, and they asked me if I knew who it was, and I said yes. But as I looked at the rider's face, I had no idea what his name was. I was haunted for years by the fact that I could not remember a friend's name and the rider I had shared a room with the night before. After finishing the event, my arm weakness and cognitive symptoms continued, and I eventually was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I retired from competing, and I pretty much gave up riding motorcycles altogether. I tossed away my dreams, my plans for the future. I sold my business, and I prepared for the absolute worst. Multiple sclerosis is a chronic disease affecting the central nervous system. It occurs when the immune system attacks the nerve fibers in the brain and spinal cord, altering the electrical signals and transmissions of messages. Visualize, if you will, a wiring harness riddled with salt-crusted connections. Just look at some of the stuff on my bike. Bad solder joints, melted insulation, and loose grounds. Now switch on your left blinker. By sending current through that weakened circuit, you never know what will happen. Maybe it'll work fine. Maybe it'll blink once and stop. Maybe the horn will blow instead. Or maybe nothing at all will happen. When I was first diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, I really didn't know a lot about it. I remember the readathons that we had in the 70s and reading books for MS, and I had met a few people that had MS over the years, but my first thought was that I was now going to be one of Jerry's kids. Well, of course, I soon realized that the Jerry Lewis telethons was for muscular dystrophy and was completely different than multiple sclerosis. The disease, symptoms, and its progression is different for every single person. And in my case, the majority of my MS symptoms have been cognitive, short-term memory loss, mental fatigue, multitasking, short-term memory loss, impaired planning, decision-making, and short-term memory loss. Despite the hours and hours that I've spent preparing these slides, I have no idea what slide comes next. I also have some weakness and loss of dexterity in my hands, burning and tingling sensations, and bladder issues, which are a lot of fun when you're all dressed up with all your heated gear and everything. Gas stops. Multiple sclerosis is unpredictable, and it affects each person differently. As in most autoimmune diseases, women are more affected than men, about 3 to 1. Most people are diagnosed between the ages of 20 and 40, and typically the disease and its symptoms and the level of disability will increase over time. Disease-modifying therapy has been shown to slow the progression of the disease, but there's no way to repair the damage, and there is no cure. Unfortunately, today's presentation pretty much has absolutely nothing to do with anything I've said so far. All of you in this room will encounter some sort of obstacle in your life, blocking your road to happiness. Also ran is the story of my incredible experiences riding the 2001 Iron Butt Rally. And I hope sharing my adventures or misadventures inspires you to look beyond your challenges, to lean hard into life's turns, and to continue chasing your passions, whatever they may be. Back in 2001, I was not yet experiencing any signs or symptoms of multiple sclerosis. But I rode a motorcycle that did. It took me over a decade to realize the uncanny similarities, my misadventures entering the world's toughest motorcycle competition on quite possibly the world's most unreliable, antiquated motorcycle was frightfully similar to everyday challenges brought on by the unpredictable symptoms of multiple sclerosis. I also believe that my struggle to overcome impossible challenges over those 11 unforgettable days helped shape who I am and has taught me that if my desire and willpower is strong enough, there's nothing my disease will stop me from attempting. I already know the answer to this. How many people are familiar with the Iron Butt Rally? Quite a few. Awesome. Anybody here enter the Iron Butt Rally? Anybody here finish the Iron Butt Rally? Why don't you stand up? Greg, right here. More people have been in space than have finished the Iron Butt Rally. Just so you know. Have you ever been in space? Me neither, but I can't wait. I'm gonna. It's called the world's toughest motorcycle competition. It's held every other year. It's 11 days long, and the average rider will average 11,000 miles. Today, the winners are up in the 13,000s over 11 days. Points are accumulated by reaching checkpoints after visiting optional bonus locations picked from hundreds of possibilities. It's not the gumball rally or a race. It's like a scavenger hunt on steroids. It's a test of planning, preparation, strategy, and tactics, riding skill, mechanical, and human endurance. It is the Super Bowl of endurance motorcycle long-distance rallies. In early 2000, I sent in my entry for the 2001 Iron Butt Rally. 100 riders were chosen, and unfortunately, I found myself number 186 on the waiting list. So I wasted no time sending the organizer a letter begging to ride the event. And knowing that they often left a few spots open for old or oddball bikes, I boldly offered to ride the most unreliable, can't get out of its own way piece of crap motorcycle ever built if they would just let me in the rally. I wrote that I would enter on a Russian Ural. The reply was rather quick, and it said, "You're an idiot, but you're in the rally." At this point, I might mention, not only did I not own a Ural, I had never even seen one. Excited, I wrote Ural America and asked them if they wanted to sponsor me, support my ride. The president of Ural America responded with, "Sorry, Paul, but nobody here in our office thinks our bike could actually finish." Talk about a red flag. So I found a used Ural myself, solo model, not with a sidecar. I hot rodded the engine and I farkled it all up with all kinds of extra accessories, and I entered it in a 36-hour event called the Mason-Dixon, as sort of a shakedown rally before the big event. And I rode it pretty hard in the Mason-Dixon. I did have a few minor issues during the 36 hours, like a snapped clutch cable, a plugged fuel line, a partially stuck flywheel, broken speedo needle, the engine jump timing, both spark plugs cracked and shorted out, the taillight and blinker assembly completely disintegrated. Believe it or not, I was able to actually fix all of that stuff, and I was scoring some pretty big points and miles that would have had me finish somewhere in the top 20 riders. With plenty of time to make the finish, I stopped just to top off my gas tank so I would have a full tank when I left the next morning heading back to New Hampshire. But when I tried to restart the bike, I found the motor had seemingly welded itself useless. So now, with the Iron Bud coming up real soon, I sent another letter, I believe at the time, an urgent request to Ural America, begging them to help me. At this point, I had a lot of the Ural riders that would kind of follow me, and so they knew that this was something that they should probably get behind. So they actually answered my request in a big way. They agreed to officially sponsor me. I just couldn't tell anyone. Talk about confidence, right? So they delivered the secret weapon a few weeks before the 2001 Iron Bud Rally started. I was going to be riding the first Ural motorcycle registered in the United States with a new, redesigned, more powerful 750cc engine. I have to sign all these non-disclosure agreements because the new engine, which was the first change in design since Joseph and Mary rode one to Nazareth for the census, it was a big secret. The bike had electric start, electronic ignition. It was like stepping up to the Japanese bikes, at least the ones from the early 70s. The 2001 rally started and finished in Alabama with 3 checkpoints: California, Washington, and Maine. On a map, it was just like a giant rectangle. How hard could this be, I thought?
People have taken over, and not just any motorcycle people. Hello everyone, I'm Dave Spain. Welcome to Bike. We're going to show you some motorcycles here. I am riding a 2001 Ural. I let people react when they're in a pain. Well, I get quite a bit of ribbing, but I get it right back, so I can take it. And I put a lot of miles on Urals, and things go wrong, I know what to do to fix it, and I have every intention of finishing the rally.
Yeah, that was kind of my, you laughed right in my face. So clearly I was laughed at for my choice of motorcycle, and some riders were actually upset that I was wasting a coveted entry spot that a real rider with a real chance of finishing could have had. Sometimes we need to remind people it's not the bike, or in the case of chronic illness or disease or other conditions, it's not one's body. But the rider and the person's spirit and willpower that will get them over the finish line. Yeah, you can see what somebody did with a Sharpie on my plate. I know who did that too. All the motorcycles go through a grueling technical inspection. Riders attend meetings about rules and conduct and sign lots and lots and lots of releases. Lots of stuff was needed to ride 11,000-mile days in a row. Lots. Even my Ural was packed up like a mule. I had custom saddlebags, a custom seat, bigger windshield, auxiliary driving lights, an extra fuel tank. I had a CB radio, radar detector, not sure where I needed that, GPS, heated grips. I was clearly ready to ride the world's toughest competition, right? I thought so. The rally is designed and run by evil Lord Kneebone, who appeared wearing a sinister cape at the riders' banquet the night before the event. Riders then get the first of 4 bonus packets containing hundreds of possible options for leg 1. Each rider's goal is to plan a route to maximize points and minimize the miles, especially not knowing what opportunities would be presented over the next 11 days of the competition. The game has begun, because between nerves and trying to map out a high-scoring route, nobody gets any sleep the night before the rally. Early the next morning, you could taste the anxiety. After all, some of us have been planning this event for years. My strategy, which I proudly proclaimed to anybody who would listen, was I was going to ride as freaking fast as I could, so when I broke down, I would have twice as much time to fix it. I was probably the only one who thought I had any chance of even making the first checkpoint. And so the 11-day adventure of a lifetime begins. Most riders were having an excellent first day, collecting bonuses by taking a photo with their rider's flag, their special flag number, whereas for me, in West Memphis, Arkansas, and about 250 miles from the start, my Ural's engine self-destructed. I tore apart the motor. First, I needed a piston. Then, I needed 2 pistons. Then I realized I needed a whole new engine. I frantically called Ural America for help. Curiously, they were not very surprised. Within an hour, we had a plan. They found a Ural dealer in Tennessee who didn't have any bikes for sale, but he had his own personal bike, and he agreed to take the motor out of his bike and to put it in mine so I could continue. I called the tow company to haul me 150 miles in the opposite direction of the next checkpoint. It's hard to know if this happened, but the tow ride was quite interesting with a driver who called himself Rabbit. Rabbit had odd tattoos and pretty whacked out ideas about, well, pretty much everything. He had 3 cell phones. He explained he was dating all the girls in town and bragged about being in an adult movie with 80 women and his brother. He talked about his cherry Camaro, which was up on blocks in his yard. We kept getting lost, but he wouldn't let me turn on my GPS because he didn't want the government to track us. There was a lot more that happened too, but I can't bring it up. Afraid to shut my eyes in the tow truck, I slept on the garage floor while Mike Mitchell removed the diseased motor and swapped his own engine into my frame in the middle of the night. I was extremely grateful, and better yet, I was back in the rally. I left the garage like a bat out of hell. Probably not a smart move. My bike now had a 1928 design 650cc motor without electric starter. I soon realized the blinker and taillights weren't working, and neither was the brake light. I kept waiting for the engine to warm up, but apparently crappy was how this engine was supposed to run. After a couple of hours, I stopped to check on the rear lights. After a quick rest, the engine refused to start. I checked everything, remembering the strokes of a 4-cycle internal combustion engine: intake, compression, power, exhaust. This piece of recycled tank turret, however, had its own version. Retake stroke, depression stroke, powerless stroke, and exhausted stroke. I alternated 4 hours of kicking and swearing with resting and praying before the bike haphazardly coughed to life. I was on the road again, heading to Pomona, and I was going to prove everybody wrong. That was until my morning freeway crash in Arkansas. The front end of the bike had developed a bit of a crunchy wobble, and a series of dips in the road started an oscillating shimmy that turned into a full-fledged tank slapper. I knew I was in trouble when I looked to my left and I saw my own butt. I slid down the highway just behind my bike, watching these bright, colorful sparks, unlike any of those plastic-covered Japanese bikes could create. After rolling a bit, I waited to assess my body damage before getting up and removing my helmet. I was in one piece, but the bike, the windshield was cracked in half, brake levers bent, both of the air cleaners were gone, nowhere to be found. The electric hand grips had been ground down. There was a 3-inch hole, a 3-inch crack and a hole in the side valve cover that had leaked oil all over the road. And it only has 2 quarts of oil to start with. There was damage to the saddlebags, the blinkers, and the driving lights. What a mess. I had made it through a blown engine, a scary tow ride, an engine transplant, electrical problems, 4 hours of just trying to kickstart the bike, and now a crash. The hardest part for me at this point was realizing only 24 hours had passed since the 11-day event had begun. I had given it all I had, but my Ironman rally was over. The Arkansas State Trooper who stopped asked me what happened. And then he asked me, well, what are you going to do about it? And I just said, what? He says, why don't you see if you can fix it and continue on your ride? The thought had not occurred to me. So I got out my JB Weld and duct tape, and the officer patiently waited while I made repairs. I told him I needed oil, because the oil was empty, and I didn't want to drive the bike with no oil in it. So he went back to his patrol car to see if a service truck might bring us some oil up on the highway. And when he come back, I said, so, they're going to bring oil? He said, no, they wanted too much money. I said, I don't care if it's $100 a quart. I said, it doesn't matter. He says, no, don't worry. He says, I called my wife at home. She's going to the store, going to get 2 quarts of 2050 oil. Will meet us up here on the highway. As I travel the country, I've benefited from the generosity of strangers just like this many, many times. The officer's encouragement for me to continue, and his wife's selfless act of kindness are not as rare as the world would have us believe. So I stopped at the first exit to check myself over, make sure everything was okay, and quite frankly, change my underwear. I called into rally headquarters to report to update my status. Day 2's official rally headlines read, Team Lazarus rides again. Tuesday afternoon, I began to experience this intermittent problem. The engine would start to run really poorly, but when I would kind of lean over and try to figure out what was going on, it would surge and start running well again. It happened 3 or 4 times before I realized that my pant leg was getting sucked into the open carburetors that had lost their air cleaners. Early the next morning, somewhere in New Mexico, the headlight, once as bright as a lit cigarette, began to get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. The voltmeter showed the bike wasn't charging at all. So I pulled off an exit and I began checking over the wiring and the connections. I found a broken stud in the back of the alternator, but causing a loose connection. I removed the alternator and I wasn't worried because I was prepared. I was carrying a spare. So I pulled out my spare alternator, and unfortunately, the spare alternator was for the 750 motor, did not fit the 650 motor. So I've been carrying around 20 pounds of useless chock full of nut cans around the country, so I sort of bowled that thing right into the woods. After a few dents in the tank, some cursing again, and an act of contrition, I finally was able to repair the loose connection in the back of the alternator. But because I had drained the battery so much, the bike wouldn't even kickstart. So I looked off in the distance, and I could see the on-ramp to the highway was just a slight decline, and I figured I had one chance to try to push start the bike. And if it failed, I would be stuck between here and the highway with an overloaded Russian Camel. So I slowly pushed out of the parking lot, down the hill, popped the clutch at just the right moment, and it started up. And we were back on the road. Things were fairly normal until Wednesday afternoon. I was 150 miles from and 5 hours before the first checkpoint in California closed. I was in the Mojave Desert. In August, it was about 110 degrees. One of the two cylinders calls it quits. I continued limping along at about 25 miles an hour until I reached the hill. The bike refused to go another inch and dies. I was completely fried. The bike was totally fried. The California Highway Patrol officer who stopped wasn't really friendly or willing to let me try to fiddle with it on the side of the road. I didn't even bother to ask him to call his wife. And against our will, we were towed into Barstow, California. Wednesday evening, I frantically tried to repair the bike, but I finally conceded I would not make the Pomona checkpoint. I had been through so much, and I was so close, but I was fried, angry, and now I was also depressed. I called into the checkpoint reporting that I was safe, but I would not make the Pomona checkpoint in time. And that's when the rally staff reminded me that you could actually miss one checkpoint as long as you were able, as long as you still went there and got a gas receipt to prove you were there, you could miss one checkpoint. But, they said, Paul, you're going to have to forfeit all your bonus points from this leg. Bonus points, I said, what the heck are those? Bonus points. The call gave me a renewed hope, and I trudged on, and I eventually found a stripped stud in the valve train, and I was able to cross-thread two nuts together to get it to work. And the bike started right up. Both the bike and I were running on both cylinders once again. I went to Pomona and got my gas receipt. I got to experience the Santa Monica Freeway during morning rush hour with only one turn signal and no brake lights. It was quite the experience. I only remember one breakdown on the way to Sunnyside, Washington, and I diagnosed it and fixed it without even slowing down. I was getting pretty good at this. I made it to the checkpoint area after midnight, and I needed a restroom in the worst possible way. But nothing was open, not a single store or gas station. But I'd gone through town a couple of times, and there was this porta potty at a red light at a construction sign. So I figured, what the heck? So leaving my bike running on the edge of the road, I took off all my gear, threw it right on the sidewalk, and I dove in. And as I was doing my business, a car full of loud teenagers pulled up to the red light. And I now understand what the term getting the crap scared out of you is all about. As the car zoomed off and I finished, I came out, I was relieved, again I suppose, to see that my bike and gear was still there. I fell asleep on a soft patch of parking lot asphalt, and the next morning I was astonished to realize I had made it all the way to checkpoint 2. I got scored, and besides the riders that were out of the rally, I was in last place. Most of the riders were pretty amazed to see me. They had heard some rumors I was having some trouble. The Ural factory team was originally meeting me in Washington for an oil change. But now they were installing the only other 750cc engine in the country into my bike. So my bike was now given its third engine, a full service, and a new steering head bearing, which apparently had fallen out and caused my Arkansas crash. The electrical wiring was repaired, and heck, it was like I had a brand new old bike again. Here's the factory crew. They were pretty glad. They were glad but surprised I had made it that far. Okay, so I'm thinking, I've got a brand new second chance at the rally. So I looked over the new bonus list, and I expressed to the Ural guys as well as the rally staff that I was thinking about heading to Alaska with some of the big bonus points on this leg. I was strongly encouraged not to attempt Alaska. In fact, I was actually threatened. If I went to Alaska and I did not make it back, I would never be allowed to ride the Iron Butt Rally ever again. The rally master added quietly, Paul, you don't understand. You have to make it. More people are following you than the people winning the rally. And he added very quietly, and some of us actually think you might make it. I'm glad he did that. After stopping for gas the next morning, the electric starter gear got jammed into the flywheel, and I had to take it all apart, bang it out to get it to work. This time I stopped after that, the same thing happened. So much for modern technology, I had to use the Kickstarter the rest of the event. Things were going pretty good until I heard this jingling sound coming from the left side of the motor. It sounded like keys dangling, but I figured I started to get a little worried, so somewhere near Rock Springs, Wyoming, I pulled off the highway into a dirt parking lot to investigate. Breaking down was not a bonus that I needed my flag for, but it should have been. At this point, this routine was getting pretty old. I found lots of aluminum shavings in the valve cover. One of the engine push rods seemed like it was bent. It was spinning in an oblong orbit. So I called and explained what I had found to Golden Hands Alex, who was the head Russian mechanic in the U.S., who instructed me, remove push rod, bang straight on the rock with hammer. So I removed the bent push rod only to find it wasn't bent. The steel cap had broken off the aluminum shaft. The push rod was in two impossible pieces. So I called back the #1 top Russian factory expert technician, who simply said, "No problem. Fine metal, make push rod." John Quinones asks, "What would you do?" I did have quite a bit of spare parts with me and tools, but I didn't have any spare push rods for the new 750cc motor. I'm not sure if this is listed on the back of JB Weld, but heck, I knew duct tape wasn't going to work. I let the epoxy harden, and I put the push rod back into the engine. The bike was running, and I took off, trying to be real gentle on the throttle. Incredibly, I rode 50 miles before somewhere near Rawlins, Wyoming, the pasted together push rod fails. Once again, I was putting along at 25 miles an hour on one cylinder. The engine was thumping, and the rhythm began to take on a curious verse. Go home, 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 go home. This was a pivotal moment. This was a pivotal moment. I stood up on my foot pegs, I opened up my helmet visor, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "I will not go home! I will not give up, you commie! Bleep, bleep!" And I took out my grease pencil and I wrote across my windshield, "I will not give up." And I vowed no matter what, I was going to finish. I just needed a better plan. I caressed my injured donkey into Rawlins, Wyoming, and I had to wait until the next morning for the hardware store to open. But in about 5 minutes, I discovered my solution. I purchased a couple of long, hardened drill bits, and with a grinder that I had spotted in the back room, I forged myself a couple of brand new, year-old push rods. Fine metal, make push rod. Who says I never follow factory recommended service procedures? The drill bit push rod worked, and the bike actually ran better than ever before. I was back on the road and on my way to the third checkpoint in Maine. Later in the afternoon, I was exhausted, and I stopped in a rest area to sleep for a bit. I found a nice piece of grass away from the cars and trucks, and I collapsed. Within a few minutes, I felt ants crawling on me, and I just kind of brushed them off. I was so tired. Then I was aware of an animal walking next to me, and it occurred to me that I was laying in the area set aside for walking your pets. I was laying in dog poop. Covered in it. Well, I jumped up as fast as I could, fully energized, got back on the bike, and continued on. In Des Moines, Iowa, the next day, I stopped at a convenience store where the clerk was outside smoking a butt. And he said, "Hey, what kind of bike is that you're riding me?" I says, "Oh, this is a Russian bike." He says, "I knew it. I knew you had a funny accent." Then he asked me if I rode it here all the way from Russia. I nearly wet my pants again. I finally snagged a couple of bonuses on day 9 as I made my way to Buxton, Maine, and the third checkpoint. Meanwhile, there were actual riders trying to get big bonuses and trying to win the rally. Oh, this is terrible for today. I'm sorry. Somebody's brother. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's rope and a spare tire. This was no iron butt rookie here. Getting through the mud in Alaska. I made it to the checkpoint in Maine, and I retrieved my care package that I had mailed there a few weeks earlier. The box reads, "This package is for the guy riding the biggest piece of crap in the Iron Butt Rally." See, I update my slides. Somebody get a picture of that, please. My wife doesn't think that's funny. Is that funny? No. Everybody gets scored for the leg. Here's a picture of my bike's windshield with my words of encouragement from Wyoming, along with some other, normal reminders like, check the oil, things I gotta do every stop. Check the oil, check the tires, check push rods. Somebody thought it was time I trade in my bike. My friends brought me some reading material and some condoms for any free time I should have on the next leg of the rally. Here I am sporting some clothing from my donation drive. That's a whole nother talk. People sent me all kinds of clothes they wanted me to wear at the checkpoints. I almost got beat up a couple times. Here are the riders getting the options for the final leg. With the exception of another charging system failure and subsequent repair of the alternator, I had a rather uneventful 1,300-mile ride to the finish in Madison, Alabama. Almost 2 years of preparation, and still I had no clue what the Iron Butt Rally would do to my body, my bike, or my soul. In 11 days, I had ridden a motorcycle never intended for anything remotely close to what I used it for. I rode a bike in an event where some riders thought I was just wasting a valuable entry spot, and even the organizers officially listed me in the hopeless class. I entered the rally on a motorcycle whose own company president said wouldn't make it. For repairing the Euro all around the country, I was awarded a special duct tape and drill bit plaque at the finishers banquet. Of 114 riders that actually started the 2001 Iron Butt Rally, 93 made it over the finish line. I may have come in 86th place, but I did indeed finish the world's toughest motorcycle competition. I will forever be grateful for taking the risk, the impossible 1,000,000-to-1 odds of finishing this event on such an unreliable, antiquated motorcycle. This life-altering experience helped shape who I am and continues to give me strength to believe in myself in the most difficult and trying times. This slide was required by my attorney. There was no collusion with the Russians. They did get the bike back, but there was no collusion. No collusion. After spending several years blaming MS for just about everything bad that happened in my life, I decided I was no longer going to just sit back and wait for this progressive disease to take over my life. I also realized, although I might never be able to compete in rallies again, that maybe I could still ride a motorcycle long distances, and maybe I'd given up on an activity that I really, really loved. And so in 2012, I began the longest and hardest ride of my life. After making my diagnosis public, I began documenting a 1,000,000-mile motorcycle journey, raising awareness and funds, while trying to encourage others with challenges in life to rediscover or find a new path as well. Rediscovering long-distance riding and making it a central part of my life has created a wonderful and powerful environment for me, opening up doors like writing, and speaking, abilities I never knew I had. As of today, I'm just about 400,000 miles in. I've spoken at hundreds of events across 49 states, raising awareness. The journey's been a little tough on my gear and equipment. After wearing out 2 motorcycles in 5 years, Yamaha finally realized I was serious, and they donated one of their flagship adventure touring bikes to my efforts, while also officially and publicly announcing their support of my journey. So Yamaha's really been very helpful to me. Rest assured, I'm beating the snot out of this bike. Yamaha's been helping me in other ways too. My motorcycle and I are invited to be on display under the corporate Yamaha tent at events all over the country, like the IMS shows that I'll be at this coming weekend, next weekend, in Long Beach, California. I'll be with Yamaha under their banner, which really helps promote what I'm doing. The first bike that I used for my 1,000,000 miles, appropriately named Cure Chaser, I know many of you have actually seen it, is on display at Barber Motorsports. It's a slightly accessorized 2012 Yamaha Super Tenere that was retired after riding it for 3.5 years. Although the odometer shows 172,000 miles, I'm pretty sure it's the only bike donated to the museum that still had 18 original loan payments left on it. Just paid it off. November 6th of 2012 was Cure Chaser's last big ride. I rode the tired Yamaha 2,000 miles in 28 hours, all on one single day. By riding west across all the time zones on the day we set the clocks back, I would set a new world record for the most hours ridden in one calendar day. The extreme ride may have finally worn out my motorcycle, but it raised about $6,000 for charity. In March of this year, I set my 3rd world record by riding this motorcycle non-stop for 24 hours on a dyno. If you're not sure what a dyno is, it's like a treadmill for motorcycles and cars. My non-stop to nowhere nonsense fundraiser was live on Facebook, and that raised over $18,000. And if anybody's interested in joining me, I do motorcycle fundraisers each year. The MS 1000 is a saddle sore you can do, Iron Butt. Get into the Iron Butt Association. You can do it with a donation to the MS charity. You get a special certificate and all the rest of the Iron Butt stuff that you would get at the plate. Also, the MS 5000 I run every year, which is 50 days for MS. You ride it at your own leisure, but you rack up miles and dollars for MS. Those are events I put on. All the donations that are collected here and that go through my website all go to MS Views and News, is where I've been raising money for the past about 2 years now. And it's a nonprofit that puts on patient educational programs. They put on free dinners, basically, for patients of MS all over the United States, where people can come and learn more about their disease. They can hear from an expert doctor, and usually they'll have other speakers. I'm one of the speakers. I do inspirational talk at a lot of these events. So it's a great way for people with MS to learn more about their disease instead of the 8 minutes you get at your neurologist's office once a year is really not enough. And some of the areas of this country, the rural, remote areas, where they don't have MS centers, they don't have MS specialists, the population with MS is in much worse shape than places like Boston, where I live, where we have much better medical attention. So we're trying to put on more programs in rural America, which is what this money is going for. So I see it firsthand where it's going, and I'm part of what they're doing with it. So that's why I put so much effort into this. I do get some support from companies in the way of parts and supplies and gear and stuff, but I don't really have any corporate sponsors. I don't have fiscal sponsors. So I do sell some things on my website, mention calendars and things. These are all things that money is gas tank money, basically. Being on the road 160 nights a year, hotels, and it gets pretty expensive. So I also have a Patreon account. There's different ways you can support me as well. I appreciate any support that you give me or the charity. Just by following me on social media really helps a lot. Some of the bigger sponsors always ask me, how many people do you have following me on YouTube and Facebook? So just by following and subscribing to my channels, that will help me get sponsorship from corporations and things. So I appreciate it. You might even like some of the things I post. Who knows? So I like to say, like, share, follow, or get the heck out of the way, because I am on a mission chasing the cure. Life is full of lemons and long shots. Having a brain riddled with holes, having a physical or mental challenge, or riding a piece of crap motorcycle should never confine or define who we are. You don't have to come in first place to still be a winner. Because I was diagnosed with a progressive and often disabling disease that has no cure, I decided to make my passion, riding long distances, more important than my disease. And by telling my story and sharing my journey, I hope I can encourage you, whether facing challenges in life or not, to continue chasing your passions, continue chasing your dreams and goals, and to never stop pursuing your passions, whatever they may be. By following my passion, I was able to discover my life's purpose. And that is all I got.